the ocean is quiet, but this is not the calm of peace. It is the kind of silence that appears when the world is holding its breath. Far away from crowded cities and bright skylines, a narrow strip of water between Iran and Oman has become the center of global attention. In the darkness of night, enormous oil tankers move slowly across the Persian Gulf, their engines humming like distant thunder beneath the surface of the sea. These ships are not built for war, yet tonight they travel through waters surrounded by military patrols, political tension, and the constant fear that a single spark could ignite a wider conflict. Above them, satellites orbit silently, watching every movement. On the horizon, naval vessels monitor the shipping lanes. Across continents, traders stare at computer screens tracking the progress of ships that carry more than just oil. They carry the fragile stability of the modern world. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important waterways on Earth. It is narrow, vulnerable, and impossible to ignore. At its tightest point, the distance between the two shores is only a few dozen kilometers, yet through this corridor flows nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply. Every single day, millions of barrels of crude oil pass through this gateway on their way to refineries and ports around the globe. For many countries, this passage is not simply a trade route, it is a lifeline. Tankers leaving the Gulf are bound primarily for Asia, where industries depend heavily on imported energy. China, India, Japan, and South Korea receive the majority of this oil, and nearly 84% of the crude that crosses the Strait of Hormuz ultimately fuels their economies. Factories, transportation systems, power stations, and millions of households rely on the steady movement of these vessels. But now the journey has become far more dangerous. The growing tension in the Middle East, intensified by the Iran and Israel war, has turned this shipping lane into one of the most closely watched regions on the planet. Military analysts, energy experts, and government officials all understand what is at stake. If the strait is blocked or severely disrupted, the impact would ripple instantly through global markets. Oil prices could surge overnight. Supply chains could fracture. Nations dependent on imported energy would feel immediate pressure. This possibility has transformed a narrow channel of water into a strategic point that could influence the direction of international politics and economic stability. Tonight, in the shadow of that uncertainty, a convoy of Asian oil tankers begins its careful passage through the strait. The ships travel slowly, maintaining distance from one another as escort vessels patrol nearby waters. Each tanker is an enormous structure of steel, sometimes stretching more than 300 meters in length, carrying cargo worth hundreds of millions of dollars. From a distance, they appear calm and steady, gliding across the dark surface like silent giants. Yet inside the bridges of these ships, tension fills the air. Radar screens glow in dim control rooms, while officers track every signal on the horizon. Every unidentified object triggers immediate attention. Because in a region where conflict simmers, uncertainty can become danger in seconds. The crews aboard these vessels represent many different nations and backgrounds. Some sailors have spent decades crossing oceans, while others are still gaining experience in their careers at sea. What they share tonight is a sense of responsibility that stretches far beyond the decks beneath their feet. They know the world depends on shipments like these. The oil inside their tanks will eventually become fuel for vehicles in Tokyo, electricity for homes in Mumbai, and raw materials for factories in Shanghai. The energy carried through this narrow passage will power industries, support economies, and sustain everyday life for millions of people who may never even hear the name of the ship that delivered it. History reminds us that the Persian Gulf has seen moments like this before. During the 1980s, the Iran-Iraq conflict turned the region into what became known as the Tanker War, where commercial vessels were targeted and damaged as rival powers tried to disrupt each other's energy supplies. Mines were laid in
rerouting course through the strait, monitor for electrical anomalies, compensate for wave interference, keep us steady.
Fear and volatility. That era left a permanent lesson for policymakers and energy strategists. Critical trade routes can become flashpoints when political tensions escalate, and when they do, the consequences reach far beyond the immediate battlefield. As the convoy approaches the narrowest section of the Strait of Hormuz, the surrounding coastline appears closer, and the feeling of vulnerability grows stronger. Mountains rise along the Iranian shore while distant patrols move silently through the water. The channel ahead is small compared to the vast oceans these ships normally travel, yet its importance is greater than most waterways on the planet. Every kilometer through this corridor carries enormous significance. Markets across the world respond to every rumor, every report, and every shift in the political climate. Investors calculate risk while governments monitor the situation closely. aware that the stability of global energy supply is tied directly to what happens here. The ships continue forward, engines steady and course carefully maintained. There are no dramatic explosions, no visible signs of conflict in this moment, only the quiet movement of vessels navigating one of the most strategic passages on Earth. Yet beneath that quiet surface lies an unmistakable tension. The crews understand they are moving through a place where economics, politics, and human courage intersect. Their journey reflects a simple but powerful truth about the modern world. Nations may compete, alliances may shift, and conflicts may rise, but the flow of energy remains essential to everyday life. And tonight, in the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz, that flow continues, carried forward by ships that must pass through uncertainty so that the rest of the world can keep moving. As the convoy moves deeper into the Strait of Hormuz, the feeling of pressure grows heavier with every kilometer. The sea remains dark and quiet, but the silence now feels tense, like a pause before something unknown. Navigation lights reflect on the surface of the water, while the engines of the tankers push steadily forward. Each vessel follows the carefully marked shipping lane, a narrow path through waters that have suddenly become one of the most sensitive zones on the planet. On the radar screens inside the bridges, small signals appear and disappear as ships, patrol boats, and distant vessels move through the night. Every signal is examined carefully, because in a region shaped by tension, uncertainty can appear at any moment. The crews know that this journey is different from ordinary voyages across the ocean. The atmosphere of the Middle East has changed, and the Iran and Israel war has pushed global attention directly onto this fragile maritime corridor. For decades, the Strait of Hormuz has been described by energy experts as the most critical oil choke point in the world. Nearly 20 million barrels of crude oil pass through this narrow channel every single day. That volume represents almost 1/5 of the global oil supply, a number so large that even small disruptions can shake international markets. Governments, energy companies, and financial institutions constantly monitor the flow of ships here because they understand how vulnerable the route truly is. The channel used by large tankers is only a few kilometers wide in each direction, leaving very little room for mistakes or unexpected obstacles. When political tensions rise in the region, the risk surrounding this passage multiplies instantly. A single incident involving a tanker could trigger panic across global markets, sending oil prices sharply higher and creating uncertainty for economies already struggling with inflation and energy demand. Tonight, those risks feel more real than ever. Reports circulating among naval observers suggest that defensive mines may have been placed in certain areas of the Gulf, and military patrols from multiple nations have intensified their presence around the strait. Surveillance aircraft occasionally pass overhead, their distant engines echoing faintly across the water before fading into the night sky. Escort ships accompanying the convoy maintain a protective distance, scanning the horizon for any unusual movement. The captains aboard the tankers know that their vessels are enormous and difficult to maneuver quickly. A fully loaded oil tanker can require several kilometers to stop completely, which means that avoiding danger depends heavily on early detection and careful coordination. Inside the control rooms of these ships, concentration is absolute. Officers monitor navigation charts, track weather conditions, and study radar displays while maintaining constant communication with escort vessels and regional authorities. Even though the sea appears calm, every person on the bridge understands that they are traveling through one of the most politically sensitive environments in the world. The tension created by the Iran and Israel war has made this region unpredictable. Military analysts warn that any escalation could draw additional powers into the conflict, turning a regional confrontation into a wider crisis that might affect global energy transportation. Meanwhile, far from these dark waters, millions of people across Asia continue their daily routines without realizing how much depends on the success of this single convoy. In cities like Shanghai, Tokyo, Seoul, and Mumbai, factories operate through the night, trains move across crowded urban landscapes, and power stations supply electricity to endless rows of homes and offices. The fuel that keeps those systems functioning often begins its journey in the oil fields of the Middle East and must pass through the Strait of Hormuz before reaching international markets. This is why nearly 84% of the crude oil traveling through the strait is destined for Asian economies. For these nations, the stability of the passage is not an abstract geopolitical concern. It is a direct requirement for economic continuity and national energy security. As the convoy advances further along the route, the coastlines on both sides of the strait become more visible. The rugged mountains along the Iranian shoreline stand dark against the night sky, while distant lights from coastal settlements flicker faintly across the water. The channel here narrows slightly, forcing ships to maintain strict alignment within the designated shipping lanes. In these confined waters, even a minor navigational error could create serious consequences. The officers guiding the tankers remain focused, constantly adjusting speed and position to maintain safe spacing between vessels. Despite the calm appearance of the sea, the emotional atmosphere inside the ships is far from relaxed. Many of the sailors on board have experienced tense situations before, but few have navigated this route during such a volatile political moment. News updates occasionally reach the crews through satellite communications, reminding them that diplomatic tensions remain high and that the strategic importance of their journey is recognized worldwide. Every successful kilometer through the strait represents another step toward stability for global energy markets. Gradually, the convoy approaches the narrowest and most sensitive segment of the passage. This is the point where the strait becomes a true gateway between the Persian Gulf and the open waters of the Arabian Sea. Once ships cross this invisible boundary, the immediate risk of disruption decreases significantly. Until that moment arrives, however, every movement is watched carefully by observers across the world. Energy traders track the location of tankers through satellite data, while governments maintain constant communication with naval forces assigned to monitor the area. The ships continue forward, steady and determined, cutting through the dark water as they carry millions of barrels of oil toward distant economies. Their presence in this corridor reflects a simple reality about the modern world. Energy demand does not pause for political tension or military rivalry. Nations depend on these shipments to sustain growth, maintain stability, and power the systems that support everyday life. As the convoy moves closer to the edge of the strait, the sense of suspense slowly begins to ease, but the importance of what they have just crossed remains unmistakable. In a world shaped by conflict, economics, and fragile supply lines, the safe passage of these silent giants across a narrow strip of water can influence the balance of global stability. Beyond the narrow throat of the Strait of Hormuz, the sea finally begins to open, stretching outward into the vast Arabian Sea like a breath slowly released after hours of tension. The convoy of tankers that had moved cautiously through the world's most sensitive maritime corridor now continues its journey across deeper and wider waters. The engines still hum steadily beneath the decks, pushing millions of barrels of crude oil toward distant destinations. For the captains standing on their bridges, the pressure that filled the night inside the strait slowly begins to fade, but the memory of that passage remains vivid. They know that what they have just crossed is not simply a stretch of ocean. It is a fragile gateway that connects global energy supply with the stability of modern civilization. Far away from these ships, thousands of analysts and officials continue to follow the convoy's movement through satellite tracking systems and maritime data networks. In trading rooms across Asia, Europe, and North America, market experts watch the location of tankers leaving the Persian Gulf, understanding that every safe voyage through the Strait of Hormuz reduces the immediate risk of global disruption. The modern economy has become deeply dependent on the uninterrupted flow of energy, and few places influence that flow more than this narrow passage between Iran and Oman. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil consumption must pass through this corridor before reaching international markets. When tension rises in the region, the entire world feels the pressure. The ongoing geopolitical tensions surrounding the Iran and Israel war have made this reality even more visible. Governments across the globe recognize that the stability of global energy markets can be influenced by events unfolding in a region only a few dozen kilometers wide. Military patrols, surveillance aircraft, and naval escorts have become familiar sights in the Persian Gulf as nations work to ensure that vital shipping routes remain open. The presence of these forces reflects a shared understanding that protecting the flow of energy is not simply a matter of economics. It is a matter of maintaining balance in a world where industries, transportation systems, and national economies rely heavily on reliable fuel supplies. Inside the convoy, the crews gradually return to a more routine rhythm as the ships move farther away from the narrow corridor behind them. Officers continue to monitor navigation equipment and maintain communication with nearby vessels, but the intensity of the earlier hours has begun to ease. Some sailors step onto the outer decks and look back toward the horizon, where the Strait of Hormuz now lies far behind them. From this distance, the strait appears peaceful, almost ordinary. Yet everyone on board understands how much importance is hidden within that thin line of water. The cargo carried by these ships represents far more than oil stored inside steel tanks. It represents the fuel that will power aircraft crossing continents, trucks delivering food across vast highways, and factories producing the goods that fill global markets. When the tankers finally reach ports across Asia, their cargo will begin another journey through refineries and distribution networks before eventually reaching millions of consumers. In cities like Tokyo, Seoul, Shanghai, and Mumbai, people will wake up, travel to work, and continue their daily routines without realizing that the energy supporting their lives passed through one of the most politically sensitive waterways on Earth. Moments like this reveal how deeply interconnected the modern world has become. A narrow maritime corridor thousands of kilometers away can influence fuel prices at gas stations, electricity costs in homes, and the pace of industrial production in distant nations. The Strait of Hormuz is more than a strategic location on a map. It is a reminder that the systems supporting modern civilization rely on fragile links that must be protected and maintained even during periods of conflict and uncertainty. History has repeatedly shown that global stability often depends on the ability of nations and industries to adapt during times of tension. The safe movement of these tankers demonstrates the resilience of international cooperation, maritime expertise, and strategic planning. Despite the shadow cast by the Iran and Israel war, the flow of energy has continued because thousands of individuals across different countries remain committed to keeping vital systems functioning. Naval crews patrol the waters, engineers maintain the ships, analysts monitor global supply chains, and sailors guide massive vessels through challenging roads. The convoy now sails deeper into open water, where the horizon stretches endlessly, and the immediate risks of the strait begin to fade into the distance. Yet the significance of the journey remains clear. These ships have carried more than oil through a narrow passage. They have carried the confidence that global systems can endure even in uncertain times. Their voyage reflects a powerful lesson about persistence and responsibility in an interconnected world. For viewers watching this story unfold, the message goes beyond geopolitics or maritime trade. The world often appears filled with obstacles, tensions, and unpredictable challenges. Yet progress continues because people choose to move forward with discipline and determination. Just like these ships navigating a narrow and uncertain passage, individuals and societies must often travel through difficult moments before reaching open horizons again. As the convoy continues toward the ports of Asia, the dark waters behind them slowly erase the path they followed through the Strait of Hormuz. The sea returns to its quiet rhythm, but the importance of that passage will remain in the calculations of governments, energy markets, and global industries. In a world connected by fragile supply lines and shared resources, even a silent journey across the ocean can shape the balance of international stability. If you are benefiting from our topics, please subscribe, like, and turn on the bell notification so you can see our new videos early.